Welcome everybody. This is Positive Life TV. That's what we're doing. We're taking the magazine and we're going to take it a bit live. So we are here with Aaravindha Himadra, who just recently spoke at the Conscious Concert. He is also the author of an amazing book which I had delivered to me one day, which just it was like a Bible coming in the door, and I was like, you know, I'm quite selective at what I read now, but 3 of them came by courier, and it just took over my whole day, and I thought it was wonderful. So it's a great opportunity to talk to Aaravindha. He did speak at the Conscious Concert. There was some brilliant moments and some brilliant insights. So Aaravindha, you're very welcome to Ireland and to Positive Life.
Thank you. It's really wonderful to be here. It's one of our really profound experiences to meet the Irish people. It's different here in this country. We travel quite a bit around the world and do quite a few seminars in Central Europe. But coming here to Ireland, it's been just one moment after another of friendliness. And there's a real loveliness that shows itself right away in the hearts of the Irish. And so we're a bit enamored right now.
That's great. You're in love with us right now.
Yeah, we are.
Okay, well, we love you too. I'm going to launch in by asking you, I suppose, the first question. And that is really, I suppose, what drew you to the Himalayas?
I had night terrors. And, you know, you've heard of night terrors with children a lot, but most night terrors are brought on by an inability to breathe. There's a respiration problem. But my night these rather vicious sort of nightmarish attacks that happened ongoing, and I was getting weaker and weaker, even to the point where I was having nosebleeds every night, and I even had to have a transfusion because of loss of blood. And I felt helpless with this because no one really understood it. They were approaching it from a medical place, and I was trying to explain, even at that young age, that this was something more. This wasn't dreams. And just at my point where I felt the most helpless, I actually remember I was going through a phase of sort of giving it up. Even then, you know, children sometimes can do that in their innocence. They don't know what they're giving up to, but they do it. And I woke up in the middle of the night one night, and we lived in the country, way out in the country, and I remember waking up, and it was a full moon, and I always had my bedroom window open, and so the curtain was blowing just a little bit, and the light was catching it, and I suddenly realized standing next to me was this full-grown man. And the interesting thing about it was there was a soft silhouette, very soft, you know, this ghost-like silhouette of light around his body, and the light caught his eyes, just as the way it came through the window from the full moon, because it was a full moon night. And I could see the color, you know, and oftentimes we can't see color very well in moonlight, but the color of his eyes just were striking. Sort of this Elizabeth Taylor color eyes. It's almost a violet eye. I had never seen that before, and of course I was that little. But my first experience was fear, honestly. It wasn't awe, it was fear. I was quite afraid. So I pulled a blanket over my head and pushed out I think I betrayed my little teddy bear. I pushed it out. It was actually an elephant. And I was like, you know, maybe he's going to do. And then after a while, I just started feeling this sense of peace and pulled the blanket back and looked. And there was just silence, just this incredible moment of silence and transference of something. There was no words spoken, but I could feel words forming in my head, and I just knew from that moment everything would be fine. And it was. From that day on, I didn't have any more nosebleeds, no more night terrors, nothing. And it was such a rich experience. And when you're small, richness often equates to falling asleep. You get to this place where you're so full, and you know, you're just. And from that moment on, I carried it for the rest of my life. That's where it all began for me. Even then, I never forgot it. I remember it constantly when I play, when I do things in my life. Growing up, I went into various fields of study, one of which was science, another which was psychology. It wasn't until the year of 2000, well, I went to India, and when I was in India, I was approached by a master, one of the masters of the Himalayas, asking me if I was ready to come home. That he would come there to guide me home. But at that time, I also, once again, I rejected it.
This is in the book where you...
It's in the book.
Yeah, it's quite a moment.
And so for another 25 years went by. And there's if you read the book, you really understand what the process of why I rejected it. I really felt that I sensed the depth of what was being offered, but I realized that it was something I still needed to do before I went back. And I honored that. It took some courage because in another sense, I felt so very, very strongly that I wanted to go. But it wasn't until 2005 I was doing a 40-day retreat in the forest, and silent retreat, and I was about 3/4 of the way through the retreat. I was under a big madrona tree on a grassy knoll, not unlike some of the lovely places in Ireland. And I had a vision, and most people would say, well, it's a vision, it could be a hallucination, it could be anything. But it was, I heard this sound, and I opened my eyes, and right in front of me was, again, this master, very ghost-like again, only this time less physical, there was just this one thing, we want you to come. We want you to come now. And I knew then that was the second invitation. I'd waited for it for 25 years, but there was no doubt in my mind. There was no hesitation. I immediately stood up, went back to my home, told the sheriff who was there, I said, what are you doing here?
I'm off to the Himalayas.
And I said, I'm going. I have to go now. And it took me a year. It took me a year to prepare, because I realized right after I made this agreement, I had no map, no idea where I was going. I just needed to go. And so that began the journey into the Himalayas. And from that point on, it was a journey of faith and endurance. Faith was the part of it that I had to rely on something. It was an inherent talent that I was born with, which I didn't know if it would be good enough, if it would be enough for me to get there. The other was endurance, because traveling through those mountains was perhaps the most difficult thing I've ever done. Even when I got a flight partially in to the mountains, there was even after the Sherpa turned back, he says, he wouldn't go any further. I suspect he probably thinks I disappeared in those mountains, because I never did come back that way. I ended up going on my own, and I was met there, and finally I realized I had come within a day's walk of the valley of this home, which is they refer to as Amarpura. Now, it's sort of similar to the Amarpura sound of the city of India, but Amarpura means sort of the city of immortals, or the place of the immortals, or Amartya in their sense. As you know, there are no such thing. We don't, only in spirit is there a true immortal, but these beings literally had control of life, their process of life and death, so they were extraordinarily old, much older than anything that we've read about or heard about in our present-day understanding of aging.
Who did you meet there, and tell us about them, and I suppose name them for us.
Okay.
Tell us their ideals, their kind of values, their way of life, and what they did on a day-to-day basis. That people have a lot of fascination with that kind of kind of stuff.
It's often there's a misconception about the extraordinary illumine being, or the extraordinary master, that they somehow are very dispassionate, very stiff. It wasn't the case at all. I met six Amartya masters, which I realized is fully my tradition. I'm now the only public face of that tradition. That's all there were at the time. Now there are 5. I know that a few years ago, when I wrote this book, one of the youngest of the masters, he died at 147, I think, maybe something like that. I can't remember the exact age right now. So I dedicated the writing of the book to him.
Yeah.
And but the individuals that I met, the first one was Amir Ramaat Kalarohan, which when you listen to the name, you realize right away that's not a Sanskrit name that we sometimes hear. And because this isn't really an Indian tradition, it's much more universal. It goes back very, very far, tens of thousands of years rather than 1 or 2 thousands of years, which even the Vedas are only 3,000 years old. So it's perhaps one of the most elusive, in my opinion, the oldest tradition in the world, but it's also one of the most reclusive. And so there's a lot of legends you can find in old monasteries or in old schooling shastras in the East, but you don't really have too many people having experience of going there. Now and then, every a few decades, somebody speaks of having maybe had an experience with this. These are very real, very loving, very present, astounding beings, what you might consider mythical. And I don't know if I like the word mythical, because mythical suggests a story. but it has that magical aspect of it because they are living truly their full potential. And so I met, Messermir was the first one that I met, and then I also met Master Rambala Sundara Himadra, and you'll realize the last name, Himadra, is like my name.
Yeah.
And he gave me the name Aaravindha Himadra as a return gift. He informed me that I had been his son 3 lifetimes ago, and he wanted to give this name back to me, and so I accepted it gratefully, and I've used it ever since. And now I've forgotten my old name. So, but the extraordinary thing was that they all had an extraordinary presence that never yielded. There was never small talk. It's difficult to explain, other than if you have experienced deep silence in meditation. And those individuals that have learned how, we refer to it in our tradition as narodyama, the ability to transcend beyond the thought into the undercurrent and then find that place of silence to watch from. That kind of place that you experience internally is there in that valley experienced externally. Your thoughts there are crisp, the gaps pure and silent. And it was the first time I had experienced in this life the difference between being in this outer current, sort of this world verity, this energy that we create, which is between our truth and our illusions. That difference is always spinning, it's always swimming. And I really very much experienced what it would be like to be living in a culture or an environment where the beings that are caring for this world had really fully attained their potential.
I mean, it sounds like a paradise within this world. Does it seem a lot more vibrant, a lot more?
Very much so.
The colors are richer.
Well, certainly, I think the colors become richer because the space lends itself for our perceptions to be pure. We don't have the bending currents that come from the stress or the toxins that are the result of our missteps in life. And so there everything seems to be in this profound order. There is this implicit order that is oozing through the environment, as though the one mind, or the undercurrent of divine mind, I might say, the omni mind, is actually right there on the surface. And Amir explained it to me one time. He said this is one of the few places in the world where there has never been an act of violence. And perhaps that's the thing that holds it. And the fact that it was brought into existence by the oldest of the teachers there, who I refer to as Grandfather Pitama. And I give sometimes the full names or other names. There was only one woman, the master in the group.
Neil Amma, is that her name?
Yeah, Neil Amatara, which if you were to translate that, now that has a Sanskrit sound to it, you'll notice, and it is actually would mean the blue Tara, or the blue Mother Tara. And if there is such a possibility, I would say that she is a true incarnation of a Tara. Extraordinary presence and power. It's as though she embodies the true archetype of the noble woman, and she carries the power just gracefully, beautifully. And she's one of those individuals that I had one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life, just in coming in contact with her, because she challenges. There's such purity in her, in these masters, all of them, but in her particular, there's such a purity there. When I actually really looked at her, like if I was looking at you right now, right into your eyes, what I had to do sometimes was, in the initial point, was I found myself turning away until I realized I couldn't anymore. Because every time there was a turning away, there was a sense of losing something. And then there was a moment of having to face yourself in her presence, because you find yourself so fully transparent. Then there's that ache that follows. And then there's the beauty that results. There's a revealing. And so she reflects back to you through her presence what a true master must. They see you with such intensity, such purity, that you see yourself and you're revealed. And so it's one of those things where you really And I would say if you see her, you really go through a transformation just through the contact. And then, of course, everything she says seems to be related to all those things in your life that you've gone through. And somehow there's this magical ability of these individuals. Because most of them have mastered the powers, what you might call the powers. Mm-hmm. True sense of mastery. That we talk of sometimes, that maybe the Danan had this sort of thing, or you might talk about the ancients. These things are very real, and they're still very real. They're still there, accessible to us, if we know how to get to them. And so then, besides that, there was Mr. Janjaran, who I just felt he had a very similar bone structure to your own face, and mm-hmm. and I don't know what nationality he was, because they all seemed a little bit different. But he was the only other Samitika Rishi that I'd met in my life. In the East, they would refer to me as a Jagad Samitika Marcha Rishi. And it's a kind of seership that you're born with and you develop, and it's my talent. It's the one thing I do well, really well. And it's also a kind of a lonely thing, because we don't often meet other individuals. I hadn't met anyone else who had that particular quality. It's not a psychic gift, but it's a seer ability. And so when I met him, he was far beyond me, really far beyond me. He had fully mastered me. He was very old, but you couldn't see it in the Masters of Khan. The youngest fellow there, or
they
the
don't
master
look physically old at all. They don't look
not at all.
Time,
no. Master Mir, he was just extraordinary old, and Nila Matara, who was extraordinary old. Now consider this, that Master Rambala was still Master Rambala 3 lifetimes back when I was his son, you see. Mm-hmm. And Nila Matara was older than him. She was his teacher, and also Master Amir's teacher. And so you get an idea how old they might have been. They never quite said, I am this old. But when you realize what they talk about, they're talking about many lifetimes combined. And in our comparison, so it's a different way of perceiving things. It's a very different way of looking at them. Simply to imagine that if we were to break down the barriers between all of our lives, and we would tie them all, we'd thread them all together on a single necklace, and then we would combine those experiences, what we perceive of beginnings and ends would soon vanish. It would become something else. And in their presence, that happens rather quickly. And one of the very first things that Nila Matara, for instance, brought to my attention, she said, this is a place that's going to be different. This is a place where things are going to be possible that you didn't believe were possible. I'm not sure that was entirely true, because there was times where I actually felt in my life it had to be that way, But they lived the example of that. And but Master Phao, he looked really the oldest. He was rather small. I'm not sure. I have a sense he may have been sort of a little bit Oriental, a little bit of Tibetan. He found the valley when he was 110, and he was on his last steps. And he shared a very intimate moment with me where he had actually died. He said he had actually felt himself leaving his body, and then they came to him because he was nearby, and under the guidance of our grandfather Pitama, and they brought him back to, revived him, and to allow him to finish his journey. And when I was there, he said he was very near. He had come to the point where he had completed his journey. And so it was only a year or two later, a few years later actually, maybe 3 years later, before he passed on. And I felt it, because now I'm so intimate with that tradition. It's with me all day long, every day. I think about it every 30 minutes. I feel the energy of it. And we lose that. Once you've touched that, we lose that sense of distance and space and boundary. And everything comes to life for us.
And the teachings, I suppose, just to finish on their way of life, and are there children there? Is it a community? Is there?
Yeah, actually, I was a little bit surprised. It's a very sparse community. In other words, you don't really see it sprawl in a sprawl way. You don't see these little houses all packed together with streets and so on. I was really more alerted to the community, because at night sometimes I heard some chanting going on. Like some folk chanting, and sometimes I heard laughter through the woods. But as the more time I was there, I met more of the individuals. I would see them sometimes working. The first time I saw them, we were cutting ferns probably for roof thatching. I saw them one time when I went with Mr. Rambala into this one area where they're picking fruits, some of which I could recognize. They had a lot of apples in the Himalayas. A lot of people don't know that. But there were apples, and there's this other fruit, I can't remember the name right now. But it was wonderful to see that they lived in a complete harmony. They had no desire. They had none of that which we have, nothing digital. And so they were much more alive in a sense, because their entire reality, their entire life was an experience of living in nature, as though nature was the spirit itself, was the body of the divine. And they had an extraordinary devotion. There was a robustness to their faces, and they were always smiling. And they had an agreement with the closest village, of course, that this place would never be revealed to anyone. So it was a very, very reclusive sort of life that they lived. But I did see things now and then. I saw things that may have been Western, maybe a T-shirt or some sandal floppies, Yeah. So that had to have come from somewhere other than there, So there was an indication that sometimes maybe somebody leaves the valley and comes back, but it's not talked about. It's an agreed about thing, and it's not hard to understand why it's not talked about. Our tradition, for many thousands of years, has worked in the background of humanity, and perhaps that's one of the reasons it has endured so well. It has never become a religion, and so it's never been undergone the conquering forces of other religions, or the practice of dogma. We don't have spirituality. We don't have right or wrong. Everything's a teacher. You make a mistake, that's a teacher. You have a success, that's a teacher. So you use everything in spirituality, versus sometimes in religion there's do's and don'ts that can have serious consequences. But in spirituality and in traditions like this, the consequences are inevitably born through our learning, through our listening. What will come of this? How do we move through that? Which is rooted in a kind of humility. And this has endured for a very long time, and they have been there for anyone sincere. Many people who have read the book have already had extraordinary experiences with these masters. Many people have had healings. I can't predict for them. I can't say for them what they would do. I can only speak for myself what I would do. And so, but there are some unique things, and my relationship is with them. My relationship is with people that I know. Their relationship is with people they know. So it's a very free form. People can approach that in any way they would choose to. But the people that have found a really deep, sincere moment, and many of them, I've read dozens of love letters, about spiritual discovery that people have made through reading the book. And some people say they've read it 4 or 5 times. Well, I just talked to somebody yesterday. She told me she read it 6 times.
Okay.
I know. It surprises me, but at the same time, I understand it, because there's a kind of darshan that occurs in spirit that is under the surface of our physicality, that occurs when we have this trust. If we just touch the archetypes that they are within us, we, in a sense, touch them. Because what they represent truly is so much of our better self, and the less limited aspects of ourselves. And the immortality is so much of what we reach for in our spirit. And so,
the thing that one of the teachings that came out of the book was the definition of love, and I spoke to you about this already. That really, really touched me. I had never heard it quite described like that before. Love is a state of limitless presence.
Yes.
A free availability to the high will.
Beautiful.
I'll have some of that if it's going. So it made me think about trying to get love from another human being, with our limitations. It's quite tricky. It's not there really.
No, it's not. There's a sense that somehow will bring us fulfillment, but that's not the direction of fulfillment.
So how do two people actually, to talk about relationship in that way, how do a man and a woman I suppose most love each other from that perspective? Is it by connecting with their own divine, connection first, and then loving from there? Is that?
Yeah, that's exactly it. One of the sort of the attitudes in society is that we need someone else to love us, to bring us to a sense of wholeness, to complete us. And unfortunately, that is one of those things that we create for ourselves that most often ends up in some form of suffering. It disappoints us. We realize that we can't rely on that external thing, and we can't really experience it. You may right now say someone in your life that may love you a great deal, but you don't feel it. That's not your experience, that's theirs, you see. And we can only experience that which is coming from within us. And so the direction of fulfillment is always that way. When we feel that we need to have a love in a relationship, if that's something we're looking for, it's because we have a sense of something missing within us. And so when we externalize that and we say that will bring us fulfillment, then we end up affirming that lack. Because the more we try to get it from outside of us, the more desperate we become, the more we want it, but it never quite reaches its mark. It's only when we get out of our own way and allow ourselves to feel what is the truth of our existence emerging through those undercurrents of bliss that arise through this inward surrender to self, that we begin to actually experience the quality of love, the true quality of love. It's not, and even then, it's not something we do. It's a state of being. It's a state of consciousness. Kindness may seem like love. Compassion may seem like love. Empathy, sympathy. They may seem like that, but no, that's what they are. They're empathy, sympathy, compassion, and kindness. Good qualities, noble qualities. But love is something altogether different, and this is why it's such a mystery to the poets, to the ancients. Everyone always talks about love, but no one can quite define it or say what it is. And so they say, well, perhaps it's a romantic thing. And in a sense, it is. Everything we do in relationship, for instance, when we seek a partner, is just to find wholeness. We use our external relationship, whether we know it or not, as a metaphor for something we're attempting to attain within ourselves. So if we were able to understand, this is an out picture, this is sort of the outer art of an inner process, then we might be able to turn to a moment of presence and say, what I'm truly seeking is this unified sense of oneness, wholeness within myself. If we know how, and there's a way to surrender to that, to allow ourselves to let go of all of the obstacles of our perception, the things that distort our perceptions, which are fundamentally our attachments and aversions, our need to be someone. And it's, again, that need to be someone is tied to being loved by someone else. We need to have that person recognize that someone to make us feel whole. But if we were able to get past those obstacles, if we were able to let go, to slip into that inner presence and just be in that place, that what quantum physics calls the Planck field, that place of silence where everything emerges from, the floor of creation within our own consciousness, we would realize that there is no longer an obstruction to what is meant to be our expression. Now, in a way, you might say that is a good definition of enlightenment. When there are no longer any obstacles within our mind, within our consciousness that are obscuring our perceptions, then what comes forward is the expression of our enlightenment, or samyak sambodhi, as we would refer to it in the East. And that then becomes a kind of order and grace that seeks expression through us. And when that lands on someone, if it landed on you, or if it landed on your partner, you see, then that becomes what the one, which knows everything in relation to you in that moment, is required to do. The Buddha, for instance, he referred to that as the underlying currents of bliss. So when you let go of everything, you find the currents of bliss. And what he's referring to is that this oneness, when we have surrendered to us, rewards us with this stream of bliss that feeds our creativity, and that creativity becomes the way in our lives. And so then the partner you are with becomes a part of your essential journey. And the gift in that relationship then is you find someone that can accept your love. And if they can do that, you have a divine relationship and not a karmic one anymore. You're not working on your illusions. You're able to find a way of expressing your truth. And that unification will happen externally, internally, in union. It can happen any number of ways because you found it in yourself. The relationship, this is the simplest way of saying it, the relationship you have with yourself is the relationship you have with another.
Letting go was something that you spoke about at the Conscious Concert. Once you did it, how it changed the experience then? Can you talk about a personal experience of really letting go of something?
I found a moment where I really lost my faith because I never placed my faith in anything ephemeral, and so there was nothing really to lose. I always felt there was something that I could rely on that was beyond the form, and I was very close to that my whole life, and so it wasn't quite like that. But I could say that honestly, one of the things that I really had to let go, one of the really big, large realizations was quite a long time ago when I was going through an experience of development of remembering. It was very, very deep, and I was on my island, on Orcas Island, where I lived. It's a small island in the Pacific Ocean, and I was driving to the small village that was nearby. But I'd been in a very deep sort of state of meditative experiences that morning and the day before, and so there was this wideness. And I remember that morning I had a particularly, it was like a chip, like a piece of stone, and somewhere inside of me fell away. And on the way to town, into that little village, all of a sudden I felt this expanded sort of, almost as though something exploded. And my awareness flew open to virtually every aspect, everything I could know in this world. It didn't seem to have any boundaries. I wasn't finding myself there, just in one place. Obviously I was there, I was conscious in a way I could drive the car. But as that happened, I heard, it seemed like 10,000 prayers. I heard whining, I heard wailing, I heard things dying and suffering, and it seemed as though I had no defense, nothing I could do at that moment. It was we have this clever ability within our linear mind to be able to address things, to do things. We can control our life, we can manage it. But for a moment there, and it seemed as though this moment was timeless, as there was no limit to it, there was nothing left to do. There's nothing I could do in that moment. And so it became so overwhelming. I felt it, filling my heart to the point where I thought I couldn't bear it anymore. It was much more than what you might call physical pain. It was the pain of the world. And I had to stop, and I sat there, and I found that I couldn't even find my breath. It was just so full. And I suddenly realized that I had to let go of my resistance to not answer that fully. The only direction I had was to go forward. I couldn't stay where I was. I couldn't maintain that sense of just doing the way I had done things. I had to enter a new way of being. And I felt as though something very old and tired died that day, and something else emerged out of that. And from that point on, then it's as though from that day on, as if I meet you, if I meet the cameraman, if I meet somebody else, I see your wholeness. I greet your wholeness. I see your beauty. The instant I meet you, I see it in your eyes. I see it in your being, and then of course there's the difference. There's what we're working with. There's the struggle, the effort to remember, to awaken, because we're listening to a very, very long story that takes us home inevitably through all of our experiences, through all of our events in life. But in that movement, I began to see the difference. And suddenly I realized this difference is the path. And I said, well, if this is the path, then this is what I can get people. I can help them remember. And that's just that alone, just that subtle realization, just everything seemed to fall into place. And it went from a kind of pain to a kind of almost a subtle bliss-pain combination.
Mm-hmm.
You realize that you can't erase the pain just because you have a realization. You can't erase the pain of the world. The pain will always be there. But you can find that there is a kind of bliss that occurs when you're willing to answer it. As though you say yes to the omni-mind, and it rewards you in that yes, it sees you in that moment, and it gives you the grace to move forward. We're these little vehicles. It takes a little time to integrate that. So it took a while for me to fully integrate that into my physiology, and so now it's something that I always remember. It was life-changing.
That's a big letting go process. Wow.
It was. Yeah. The only thing I can compare that to is a huge initiation that I had in the Himalayas with the hands of the masters in order to be in the company of Grandfather Pitama.
Yeah. Mm.
Grandfather Pitama was, it's not describable by our usual sense. When I wrote the chapter on Grandfather Pitama, it was the most difficult of all, because I had to put it into a linear experience, which it really truly isn't. And I think if you read it carefully, you can sense that.
What's the difference with Grandfather Pitama? I mean, is he the head of the community in some way? Is he the presence within the community almost?
I think he is. I think he is the sole presence. And this, please forgive me if this sounds arrogant. I don't mean it to. I think he is the sole presence of divinity for our world. He's a guardian. He's been a guardian of it for thousands of years. Now, there's a key. What I just said, there's thousands of years to an idea of how old he might be. And he lives by himself in this crux of this mountain that I had to walk to. It was the walk itself was a kind of journey. But once I had come to the valley, it was really a period of time where I had to. I really didn't think I would have permission to see him, because even the others of the group, they all live together, but there's no sense of hierarchy anywhere.
They live in the one home together, or they live in?
Well, there's a kind of a sort of a stone pavilion that exists as this wall, and a lot of vines over this wall. And it looks like this wall has some kind of relief under it. I still don't know what the full relief is that's under it, but it's a very magical place. It's like must have been built thousands of years ago, and the dwelling space inside of it has been carved out of the rock. And so there was one window that was up above, and there was the symbol that was partially eroded but also viewable above that. And so it wasn't like a house or a building. So it was actually carved into what you would call sort of a stone cliffside. So it was one single large rock. And whenever I wanted to spend some time with them or something, it was always connected to that. So I know that they spent most of their time there. But even them, I think they're in many ways such a mystery. I remember one time, the next day after seeing Master Mira, I asked Rambola where Master Mira was, and he said he was somewhere 50 kilometers away. And, the first thing in my mind was, that's just not possible. You can't cross these, you can't go 50 miles in kilometers. And then I forgot where I was. And I was, no, of course it's possible. This is a different sense of reality here, and I have to adjust myself to that. It takes a while to break the conditioning of our seeing. And it happens rather quickly, but it took some time to break through those boundaries for me to be able to see what was really going on there. And so then by the time evening was there, he was there again. And so there are some things that can happen there that are very extraordinary. And many, many things did happen there. Many things that I haven't included in the book.
You mean by location and that kind of
stuff?
Yeah,
and this is, to me it's always been a fascination, because I've always understood how these powers are done. And I've known it somehow my whole life. And so a lot of what I discussed particularly with Master Mir and Janjaran were those elements, and how to master them and how to develop them and so on. And so now I'm trying to find a way of reintegrating that into the world, bringing it to the people. My intention is to support teachers, so the teachers can support their students. I'm not interested. It's not the Maharshi tradition is not one of conversion. it's not a religion.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of support.
Mm-hmm.
And so the work that's being done is to find ways to help people find their best talent and potential.
And speaking of support, I mean, you know we're in a transitional time. I mean, that's pretty obvious.
Yeah, it really is.
Loads of people are having symptoms, physical symptoms, panic, fear, all these kinds of things. What do you say to people that are going through those kinds of experiences? Can you help them with advice or ways of dealing with it?
Well, change is coming. There's no doubt about that. There's no way to stop that. It has to happen now. We're at an extraordinarily important point. In a way, we could call that, like what you do in Ireland, it's a very thin time between worlds. We are looking at two possibilities. We're looking at the dawn, which has begun, somewhere around the year 2000. There was a dawning, and we are also looking at a potential extinction of humanity. And we sense that because what we see is a breakdown of everything. We see a breakdown of our economies, a breakdown of our social standards. We're seeing a breakdown, even of religions are starting to fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
And but most importantly, what we're seeing is that we're seeing a breakdown of our environment. What we have done, and you in your history in Ireland understand this probably quite well, is we've gone from having a full sense of integration of spirit in everything. In other words, there was no separation of nature and spirit. There's no separation of that rock and a deity. It was all a singular understanding. There was no other world that wasn't here. There was just a matter of removing the veils to uncover the other world that is here. And that sense, for most of the world, has been lost. And it's there. But for most of the world, that has disappeared. And people are yearning for it. They're hungering for it. And without that, we are an isolated people. Because we find ourselves separate. Our divinity is living in one area, and our humanity is living in another. And in our humanity, we are competitive beings fighting for survival, somewhat in a Darwinian model, the survival of the fittest. And who's the best? Or, if we choose, who's the worst? It's all the same. It's a matter of this fighting for some kind of an identity, and we find ourselves separate from each other. And that's a recipe for disaster that's been going on for a very long time. And as graceful and as lovely and as giving as the spirit of the earth has been, it's in a state of exhaustion now. And so humanity is starting to recognize, the larger part of humanity is starting to recognize, even though the structure at the top is still resisting, that we need to change. Because our survival depends on it. And it doesn't depend on any more debates of right and wrong. It depends on actually raising our consciousness. And so when you recognize that in itself, you begin to realize that if you have been on any spiritual journey, that it's work. There's work to be done. And if we don't do the work, then we suffer more exquisitely than before. I mean, there's a sense that if we resist now, we will feel the pains of that resistance more than ever. Mm-hmm. And one of the most fundamental resistances happens is maybe more a vulnerability than a resistance. And that is that we have a sense, with all this happening, what could I possibly do? I mean, hasn't everyone felt that? What could I do? Mm-hmm. We realize in a single day, 200 species have vanished from this earth forever. You see, people are dying from bombs falling because we value oil more than blood. You see, and this is terribly out of order. It's become the mantra of our society to continue to pursue that. Mm-hmm. But there are people that are starting to pull back. They're looking for an alternative, and they're feeling it, but they don't know what to do. And one of the things I would say to everybody is it isn't so much that you save the world. You don't have to save the world. Start with yourself. Start with getting to this place of giving up your own resistance to the calling. All of us, in our hearts, we have a special calling that comes up in the face of another suffering. We instantly know we want to find a way of supporting that being. Mm-hmm. We want to stop that suffering. If we act on it, we suddenly feel that instead of feeling wobbly in our legs or unsure or shaky, once we begin to act on that, we feel a sense of power filling us. Because we are acting on a divine law, an essential law that is integral to the movement of that one omni-mind that is trying to move humanity forward. Because one omni-mind is constantly healing our mistakes in nature, in ourselves, in humanity. If we take that on and we honor that, rather than saying, I'm helpless, I can't do anything, I can't possibly save all those whales, or I can't possibly save the wolves, I can't possibly save, the earth from fracking or from all those things that are happening, what can you do? You see, so you have to look, because people, they've forgotten their presence. There's never a moment where you're not being made an offer. In every moment, it's what turns time. As long as there is a lack, there's asymmetry in life. If there's asymmetry in life, that's like art. There's a place for the eye to go. And if there's asymmetry in your life, if you feel it, you see, it's not a place to retreat from, but it's a place to go to, something we can act on. But we first need to become present to this. We have to stop denying the difficulty and accept it as the voice of the teacher, the voice that's coming from someplace deeper within us. You see, if we can hear it, not as a dialogue, but as an urging, the way a muse might sing a song to us and it wakes us up to dance. If we can feel that to be true for us, it will lighten our load and it will empower us. And this is what we need to apply to. We need to act now more than any other time in humanity. There have always been problems in the world. Mm-hmm. There will always be problems in the world. We live in an imperfect world because that's the way it's meant to be. It's not meant to be perfect. We strive towards that, but it's not meant to be perfect because perfection does not exist in nature. Only movement does. And nature does. And it's a reach towards an understanding of perfection.
Is it almost like imperfection is where the real beauty is?
There's extraordinary beauty in imperfection.
Yeah.
Because it gives us life, it gives us movement, it gives us power. It takes us from a kind of placid, helpless consciousness to a dynamic, conscious awareness, provided we attend to it. You see, we attend to it. That responsibility, instead of just accepting it in our lives, if it's just a child falling and picking that child up, or a bent flower and straightening it up, or putting something into someone's hands that's suffering, there's so much that can be done. And all that, this is the part that is perhaps the most important of what I could say in regard to that original question.
For people, yeah.
We can't do that if we don't first give it to ourselves. If we don't first attend to, listen to what the need is, what the difference is in us, and attend to act on it. Most people just accept it, integrate it, say, this is who I am, this is what I am, this is how I think, this is what I've done, this is my definition. And from that moment on, they suffer. Because the moment we create a definition, everything in nature comes to destroy that definition. But if we go back to that nature, where we have learned to let go of the obstructions to our feeling, and listen again, you're coming very close to that original question that you gave me, what is love? That's the foundation. That's what's going to save this world. Nothing short of that. Only when we have given up all resistance to the truth of our existence will we bring this right back into order. Now, not everyone has to do this. It may appear that way. Only those really, we just need a certain number of these individuals to attend now. You see, because order is much more powerful than chaos. You can have a small group of orderly individuals and that just ripples out like your lovely spirals and circles that you have in these lines in Ireland. It ripples out, that order, and gets larger and larger and larger.
And when you spoke about the birds turning all together,
yeah,
a flock.
A flock is, in a sense, an example of that order. It's the grace of the hand of the one. In a way, it's our way of seeing the teachings in nature.
There's a part of that me that sometimes feels that it's all kind of taken care of. I feel secure, and there's another part of me that doesn't, feels terrified. But there's a part of me that really feels it's, if this is really an illusion, all of this, then why take it so seriously sometimes, Because, I know there's a lot of things in the world that are quite terrible, but why take it so seriously?
Well,
should we not, I suppose my question is, can we have a bit more fun with this? Can we have a bit more, that's kind of my nature. I mess around a good bit, so it's like, how do we make it less serious in a way, Should we?
Yeah, I'm not sure we can make it less serious, but we could make it more fun.
Yeah, okay.
One of the things that I was saying, trying to get across oftentimes when I'm giving lectures, is that once you start acting on the calling that's going on, you don't go to a place of sadness, you go to a place of bliss. The undercurrent of your true creative actions are blissful. They're currents of bliss. They want us to dance. They fill us up with joy. They fill us up with light. And to resist that, then it gets kind of dreary. It gets dark and sad and gloomy. And so the real thing is, the more we resist, the more serious it becomes. The more we act on it, the more we realize that action, that willingness to turn everything into your teacher. Like, inspiration is an obvious teacher. We're drawn to it easily. But how many people can turn their pain into their teacher? That's a huge step. Mm-hmm. So if we can turn our pain and our suffering into our teacher, it ceases to be pain and suffering. It becomes a voice. And eventually you find that the person that is really sincere then starts to look for problems. It becomes a game. It's almost an investigation into life. We seek out our problems because we know there's this extraordinary opportunity, and we look at them with a sense of enthusiasm. And that's when things really get exciting in the path. This is, you suddenly realize everything is for you. Everything is for you. And most certainly, this isn't an illusion. This life is, on some levels, in so much as that it is never the whole. It's only always just a piece. For a long time, we had this idea, coming from the East, that the best way to find oneself is to say nitty nitty, not this, not that. I'm not this, I'm not that. I'm not this, I'm not that. And that works to a certain extent, but that's only half the story. You see, because everything is essentially one, and that means everything is included in the one. So this may also be you, but you're not just this. So then the illusion suddenly goes, well, maybe it's not an illusion. Maybe it's just that page in the story of the eternal. In other words, maybe this is the eternal speaking to us, telling us who and what we are. And so when you see that, you realize, oh, life is that. It's a revealing. It's an essential illusion. We need it to know ourselves. You see, when you have wholeness, absoluteness, you have silence. If the silence was content, why would it create this?
Yeah.
You see, it's not content with being silent because it's perfection. It had to reflect back upon itself. It created a moment, and out of that moment came this revealing that is now your life. And that life goes on and on through form after form until you finally become that divine manifestation that initial intention desired. It wanted to make you a divine manifestation. And when you give in to that, you use this illusion, to bring fulfillment. Mastery is that place where you re-attain that wholeness, but you live on the surface of reality so that you can play in it.
I heard it described once that it is an illusion, but the experience that you derive from it is real.
It's very real.
Yeah, and causes growth.
Yeah, and we need that growth because, some people would say, well, doesn't God already know everything? No. God doesn't know everything. God realizes everything ongoing. And that the way that happens is even if you understand physics, and you were to say, quantum physics oftentimes talks about or even relativity, oftentimes talks about time as a single block. And that if you were to look at this single block of time, you could slice it up like a loaf of bread, and each one of those slices is a frozen chronostatic moment. Okay, but the truth is, they can't really say time. Physics can't really do that because it can't say the future is a part of that model yet. Because everything that has happened is definitely a part, and it can reach to eternity. It could reach infinitely into the distance of the past. And so you can't measure it, but certainly this moment, okay, is where you've come. Everything of the future is yet potential. It's all waves. Mm. It only becomes real once we choose it. And so once we choose it, in a field, I hope I don't get too heady here, in a field of uncertainty, we realize we exercise free will. If we exercise free will, that means we can still design the future relative to our own need to know. Now, if we look at that as a whole of creation, realize that's exactly what the one divine presence is doing. We are all parts of that revealing. So if we become present, truly become present, we're standing on the edge of the universe with our beloved, with the one, right on the edge of the universe, looking into the abyss of possibility.
That's the one we've all been looking for.
Yeah. That makes life exciting.
Yeah, that's the soulmate. The one soulmate. I like it.